We're going to open this session with something a little bit different, so if you're looking for a seat, please find it and we'll get started here. And you'll find out in a moment the reason why. Okay, this is the panel part of Climate Tech 2024 is Community Partnerships and Clean Energy Infrastructure, a new model for development. I think you've all seen the bios in the materials prior to this meeting, and what we'd like to do, I will do, is first kick it to Grand Chief Gusanahawe for a Thanksgiving blessing.
I'm going to stand. So what kunuradu za wagwegu, Gusanahawe sky dear yujats, Gahnawagi ni duagana, wagatahuni ni wagitaroda, so I'm Grand Chief Gusanahawe Sky Deer, coming from the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, which is just outside of Montreal in Quebec. I'm a Mohawk, Ganyet Gahaga, people of the Flint, and before we do any kind of major event, meetings, ceremonies, we always do what we call the Thanksgiving address. I'm going to do it quickly in my language. I think it's important for you to hear the Mohawk language, and then I'll do a quick translation as well in English. So if I could just have your attention, the wadadegas, the wadosios, kanigariwesa, the onayagahawe, on the wawanuni, nugwani gura, then the sidunuara, the nesungwaya dezu, then a guegazina hoda, the winada on a ganto ziohunzade, gohaguegune ungwe sua, ne oni ukini stahan ziohunzade, then a guegazina hoda, gamha, de gotkohajane, you got the gridage. De tunara the negahnagrunu, ne ugunya the nawa, then a zinu guzu, a godinagre. De tra de gohaguego ohunde so odera so and anukwa so a guy ne gato zihunzade then ne oni jon hekwa asini godanoza honeste was a head that dano ona uzura de tra de negahi so ne oni aguego godirio agaharunya gen guadi odinua so dano garunda so dano ogre so gariada ne guadi gayeri ne gawarage so guadi aja kanaka garakwa ne oni yukisata sanaka garakwa then igere toniore what gari what wani So basically the Thanksgiving address, what we call the words that come before all else, is something that we all collectively put our minds forward and we acknowledge the Creator. We acknowledge all of the beautiful people. We acknowledge Mother Earth. Because for us, everything that is here for us to be healthy, thriving people has all been put here for us already. So we acknowledge the water, all of the plant life, the animals, the fruits, as we go into the bushes, all of the animals, the trees that create the oxygen for us to breathe. And then as we go into the skies, we acknowledge the sun and the moon and the powers that they have to help growth. And then our grandmother moon, because she helps work with all of the women. If it wasn't for the moon, we say that the children that are being born and the stars. So all of that, they all need to be acknowledged. And for us, that was a part of our original instruction to be able to give that. And I just wanted to share that with you as we commence today, because obviously everything that we're working toward because of climate change, global warming, is to ensure that these things in our natural world continue to do what they're intended to do for all of us. So let that be in your minds. Tony Owanage, those are all the words of the Thanksgiving address.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was excellent.
Thank you.
So we have about 35 minutes and counting. What we're going to try to do, we have agreed as a panel that we're going to try to create 10 minutes for questions. There is a mic over to the left, stage left here. So if you have questions, please do feel free to ask them at the appropriate time. With that, I'd like to go back to you, Grand Chief, and really talking about, and we'll get to the particulars on the project, but what we thought would make sense would start to the Grand Chief. And if you would, please talk about the impact of energy in your community and why this is such a groundbreaking agreement that we're talking relative to the Champlain Hudson Power Express.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I think a lot of people have misconceptions still about what life is like in a First Nations community or a tribal community. I mean, we're just as advanced as everybody else. We depend on hydro or energy, or especially coming from Quebec.
Right.
Hydro has been long-standing, probably since around the 50s or 60s. But our relationship with Hydro-Quebec wasn't always the greatest. There had been some land expropriations, there was tower lines, there was loss of land use. So in order for us to get to this stage, there had to be some reconciliation actions that took place. Number one was some decommissioning of some old tower lines that were no longer in use, and the removal of those that allowed access to the lands again. And then when Sophie Brochu, who was the previous CEO, came into the picture as the first woman to hold the position, and I was the first woman to hold the position of Grand Chief, when we first met and talked about the necessity of partnerships to be built on people and relationships. Right. And it was a different mentality and a mindset to bring us to a place where we could have real constructive dialogue about what this project could mean for the community. And then so for myself and looking at the impacts, I mean, this is a 40-year agreement that will bring revenue generation to the community so that we could deploy into the things that are important for us, like things that we might not get funding for from the government. For instance, revitalization of our language and culture, sports programs, infrastructure, technology. So there's a lot of areas where there's definitely shortfalls, so we have to create our own revenue base. Also job opportunity, in terms of putting into infrastructure. There's been a lot of men and women who have worked on both sides of the border because of, basically J Treaty. The border cut right through our nation. And a lot of our people had built up the New York City, Boston, Washington skylines because of ironwork. Mohawks were known to be high steel workers. They weren't afraid of heights, even not being tied off, back in the 50s and 60s. So, just that evolution of our tie to major cities, and now looking at the future, or this generation, will help to, light up the city and with clean, renewable hydroelectricity, which is amazing. And then the fact that Hydro-Québec took a risk in opening up the door for a First Nation to be a partner in the infrastructure, which is the first time that has ever been done. So it definitely was a historic and trailblazing moment for the Mohawks, which we're very proud of. And so it definitely has significant meaning for the community. It's something we're very proud of, and looking into the future of more that can be done.
One quick follow-up, if I may, please. Was there any element of extreme weather you've been experiencing, say, over the last 6 years, 5 years, 10 years, that also plays into like a virtuous cycle helping Hydro-Québec? Do you see a climate change, a direct climate change linked to this agreement?
Well, we definitely see that there's been major weather anomalies. Actually, we're even getting tornadoes now. There was actually one that just touched in Rigaud last weekend, which is about 30 kilometers from us. So, we're seeing the weather patterns changing. We noticed that there was barely a winter this year. People are complaining that it seems like they're constantly experiencing outages of power, and, wanting to maybe look into getting generators and stuff, but it's all part of the pattern and the things that we're realizing, and why that message was so important for me to bring to you about that Thanksgiving address. Because if we don't start taking care of the natural world and our Mother Earth, we could see that she's impacted. In our minds, she's sick. And if we don't start changing the way we're doing things, the way we see things, because we can't eat money, and the time is going to come where things are just on a decline. So it's up to us as this generation, as humans, humanity, to start to do things differently.
Thank you very much. Speaking of equity and the like, Aaron, I mean, this is tailor-made for you. If you just describe a little bit, to give it life, some of your bona fides with regards to, as a founding father of the energy equity movement, and what you've seen in the arc of improvement with regards to community engagement and partnerships, and what do you think this project represents?
Well, see, when is this thing, is this on? Okay. Well, first and foremost, this is not to be here, and kind of figure that with them. It's not to be here, and when I heard about the conference, it's going to be at the House of Blues, and I thought it was going to be singing bass and playing the bass, and earth, wind, and no fire, So we're no longer, the real issue is the transition from burning stuff. A little bit about me, Dr. Aaron Mayer, retired epidemiologist from the New York State Health Department, biostatistician, public health field, and how does a person move from that field into climate and environmental justice? Very simple, like any frontline community, many of our communities sit in, as they say, those areas that were either pre-industrialized in or are the places where they put locally unwanted land uses. So this is where the electrical transfer stations, waste transfer stations, sewage treatment plants, a lot of these things happen in these communities. In my case, it was the state-of-the-art technology back in the late 70s and early 80s of solid waste incineration, again, burning stuff. I came to the movement because 2 of my daughters were poisoned, and they ended up with something that I was just totally shocked with, called environmental asthma. And this is when the particulates and the soot and stuff from the incinerator coats and irritates the lungs, and your children present. So I came because my babies were injured. And at that point in time, there was very few people in the field of connecting the dots between environmental pollution, frontline communities, and their disproportionate impact. The toxic waste and race study would come along in 1987 by Dr. Charles Lee, who's a dear friend of mine. And that put not only the first statistical longitudinal study and analysis that showed the disproportionate burden of frontline communities, but it, again, was a predictive model of where polluting facilities would be. And that led to what would become the environmental justice movement. And in that international and national movement, I met a gentleman by the name of Tom Goldtooth, who would eventually form the Indigenous Environmental Network. So it would link in this longitudinal history of the evolution and development of this nation and its practices, but not only were people disposable, but the inequity that shifted with it. And so
Right.
fast forward the years of founding the nation, and we're getting ready to sell 450 years, we're still dealing with frontline inequitable uses. This partnership is very profound. This is, as I say, in an age where we're looking at the shift and need to go to clean energy, we also must transform the relationships. And that's one of the spaces that I've been working to develop. So when I left the state of New York, I went to the environmental movement, not as a public health consultant, but actually because this is where we need to do the action, because the environmental and climate movement right now is the biggest public health crisis and issue that we will, an existential threat that we are going to be facing. And currently, I am the Wilderness Campaign Director in ancestral Mohawk lands in the Adirondacks in upstate New York. And at 6 million acres, it is the largest wilderness ecosystem, wilderness carbon sink in the lower 48 states. So when we talk about not only the technology
Right.
that we're going to try to manufacture to shift and transition, we got to also look at what nature has given us, and that we tend to discount primarily because there are other competing capitalist interests that seek to still burn through wood pellets, et cetera, under the term of biomass. And so we need these wilderness ecosystems. We have an opportunity from basically from the Adirondacks to Maine and into Canada, the Algonquins, to, as I say, transition and pull in these natural ecosystems. But we also have upon the ancestral tribal lands of the Mohawks, the Cree, and other nations, the natural resources that are there in the form of hydro. And the fact that 2 women, and I'm not surprised it was 2 women that got together, the Grand Chief and Sophia, that got together, that transformed this relationship from one of hostility and antagonism to creating one of mutual respect, but the next logical transition that we must go on, as I say, in this clean energy transformation. And so right now we have this wonderful opportunity, and as an EJ pioneer that's been to the earliest COPs and at Paris, one of the things that I pushed for and were leading the conversation on when I was the 57th president of the Sierra Club was that just transition, clean energy transition, is not just only the technology, but new 21st century world practices of respecting and labor and cleaning up the relationships with labor, as well as frontline communities that are going to be very instrumental in rolling out and participating in this. And another way, again, to look at this is not so much in the terms of what are they investing. Their investment is just like the Saudis or the Kuwaitis. They don't have to rely on fossil fuel, but they have the hydro and the clean energy. So what the First Nations and their ancestral rights and claims bring to the table are essential natural resource technologies, that new partnerships that build respect between the colonizers and the colonized. This is something very, very innovative, and that we have to now lift this up. 25 years ago, I was in a battle, against hydro because of the lack of respect to First Nations. Now I'm at the leading champion of it because it is a pioneering EJ effort and a new way forward, not only just between First Nations and Canada, but we need to talk about our First Nations within the United States as well as First Nation peoples in other countries.
Quick question, please. Thank you. Then we'll get to Serge. And remember, a few minutes we'll have questions, so get your questions ready, please. Just quick question for you. Are you troubled in any way by the studies that have been done, some now dated, with regards to the negative climate impacts of hydro, of large-scale hydro.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you asked that question. It's a very fair question, and I look at it in light of, we had Dr. Fauci yesterday before Congress, and where a person who is not a doctor, not a PhD, not a scientist, was, because of their political positioning, was going to delegitimize. And that's the problem with nowadays. Right now, I just think that we are in a position and place, and again, as a scientist, we now need to move the needle. Last year, we were at 1.5 degrees average global temperature, and it's basically simple physics. At 2 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures, ice melts. Let's be full stop. We begin what they call the long, slow thaw. And that means when you're looking at ice caps on top of mountains, etc., you start to lose that at 2 degrees Celsius. You start to lose winter as we know it in northern climes. So this is a real, as I say, not only sign and harbinger of what's to come, but this is a real reality. And sadly, it's not till you wait till you get a 2 degrees Celsius increase and then all of a sudden the globe wakes up and says, can we stop it now? The answer is that, yeah, you can stop, but you've locked in that climate increase for the next millennia. And that's where, folks need to understand that we should be very disturbed right now by how calm the average American and average citizen is around the globe. I'm not saying that you should be hair on fire, but political action should be driving to ratchet down carbon use.
But Aaron, on large-scale hydro, you're good.
On large-scale hydro, as it currently is, right now, a lot of the science is in. There is definitely that bump. In fact, when you flood an area, there's the decomposition of as I say, of vegetation that emits. But it still is, not at the scale, because people want to make the false equivalence of, well, it's just as bad as burning coal. No, it is not. And if you're going to make the argument, as a scientist, you want to produce the science. So yes, there are indicators in new dams that you do have an increase of carbon risk, but it is not at the scale. Let's be clear, it's not at the scale of burning fossil fuels.
Thank you. Thank you. Serge, here we sit in Boston, Massachusetts, part of the heart of New England, and we're discussing a transmission project in New York. Tell us a little bit, if you do a quick profile of the project itself, and then maybe set the context. What do you take away from this in this community partnership you've built?
We've lived both successful projects in New York. There's another project we're building in New England as well. And so it gives maybe a different perspective of both regions. Both projects are very different, especially in the way that they unfolded. I will say that one of the big takeaways from this Champlain Hudson project that we're partnered with the Grand Chief here is that it has been a relatively successful project without too much adversity, without too much controversy. And that's really important when we look at our ability to achieve the scale at which we need to transition. We need to build these large projects. And so it is possible to build large infrastructure, renewable infrastructure, with public acceptance. However, it takes, and that's the biggest takeaway, it takes a couple things that are essential. The first one is you need to do things differently from our perspective, and utilities traditionally have not been good at doing that. And the other main one, I think, for our relationship with the Mohawks is you need to recognize past wrongs. And we're in 2024. We don't do things in our industry the way we did things 75 years ago, right. But we don't do things the way we did things 10 years ago either. And that is a fundamental shift in terms of rethinking these partnerships in order for us to be successful. Having a win-win partnership with the Mohawk community, equal to equal, equity partners that stand to benefit from these projects for years to come is an essential part of this. This is a first, as the Grand Chief said. I can tell you it is not the last one. There will be many more. This is the new standard. We will only improve on this formula, hopefully, with our partners and keep adding on to it. Just in the past 6 months, there's, just for context, greater context, there's 55 Native communities in Quebec, out of which you could say we had fairly stable, good relationships with, I'd say, the bulk of them, upwards of 45. And then you had a certain group of them, I'd say mainly Innu communities, where we needed to address historical grievances. And this is something that we recognize. And so Sophie was there before, Michael is there now, that's our new CEO. And they've been going at addressing these issues one after the other. I would say with some success, Just in the past 6 months, Garrick, we've managed to sign 4 different agreements to address historical grievances and to initiate this reconciliation process. So it's important both from the Indigenous standpoint, but it's also important when you look at how we address community partnerships in places like New York City and places like Boston. There's a real need for developers of these large projects to be directly connected with the communities that are hardest hit by fossil fuel pollution, by the impacts of the way we run our economies. And if you look at New York City as an example, some of the most engaged partners have been people that live in Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn. Why? Because they are living next to fossil fuel peakers that creates asthma in their communities. Aaron, you talked about this, and this is fundamental because they need to see these peakers go away and shut down in order for their families to be healthier, not to have this air quality issue. So people getting engaged in this conversation, utilities bringing value to these communities in many ways, way beyond energy, for us has been extremely positive. Not because it's transactional, we're talking about after these projects are under construction, but because it creates long-term value and sets the stage for whatever's coming next.
So 2 things. One, are there any other, since this is about new and community partnerships, and you mentioned New York City, are there any aspects and the Grand Chief talked about some specific elements of the agreement with the Mohawk Nation. What about other agreements that this audience might benefit from and take and maybe replicate in other areas? Any other aspects?
Well, I think, when you take the energy on this project, and it's enough to power 1 million homes, same as the project that's coming from Quebec through Maine for New England. They're both 1 million homes of renewable hydropower. Now, project in New York is very different from the New England one, certainly because of these points. It brings other initiatives. The one in New York comes with a green economy fund. It essentially is a $40 million fund dispersed over 20 years to facilitate green job trainings in disadvantaged communities. It's got its own advisory board, it's independent, and that will facilitate green job trainings for years to come in New York. Again, bringing value to communities, ensuring that this is more than just energy. This is people actually retraining, getting new skills, and contributing to this new economy that we're building.
Last quick question, and then we'll get to a quick thumbnail on the project. But I'm interested in, from an outsider's view, the province of Quebec has had a bit more protective view that's emerged of that precious hydro resource, of these renewable energy resources. What was the reaction of the broad populace within the province of Quebec to the agreement that you signed with the Grand Chief's tribe, please?
Overall, I think most people, and I can't speak for the whole of the population, but I get a sense most people are supportive. They think it's about time that we work in a constructive way together. So overall, positive. I mean, people are, like anywhere else, concerned with the size of the effort that has to be deployed, how much clean energy is needed, not for today, because we have energy today, but for the future. For our own needs, we need to double what we produce when you look at 2050 and decarbonizing the other half of our economy, which is heavy transport, industrial uses, still relying on fossil fuels. So I think the feeling is whatever we can do, working together within Quebec, across the border, is viewed as positive.
Thank you. Grand Chief, if we could come back to you, please. I wonder, you have this great agreement, and I wonder how much it's been shared with your peers, with other First Nation peoples and communities. What do you see for the future? What does this build towards as we as you said, as we bring our minds forward together, what do you see happening going forward, please?
That this has opened up a whole new world of opportunity for First Nations and tribal people, because finally what it was a recognition that we were here, that these are our lands, that for the longest time we were just kind of left on the sideline. We weren't included in any kind of economic development ideas or things that we could be a part of. We were always kind of looked at as a barrier or, that we would,
Obstacle.
yeah, exactly. So now this kind of changes the game, and we can prove and show that we can be worthy partners. And that I was even told by the Mayor Bill de Blasio himself, if it wasn't for the Mohawks, Hydro probably wouldn't have got this project bid, because I was there talking to people like Aaron and the environmentalist groups and talking about our perspective about, yes, there had been historical wrongs, yes, there was flooding of traditional lands, yes, there was all of these things that happened historically, but it doesn't mean it has to impact and shape our future of where we're going. This whole mantra of reconciliation means we recognize past wrongs, we agree to acknowledge it, but then we say, well, now what could we do differently so that we're not repeating the mistakes of the past? And I think now, like you said, there's 11 nations in Quebec, 55 communities. They're all looking at us saying, oh my God, how did you do this? And can you show us the blueprint, or can you help us? And we're telling Hydro-Quebec now, with a new CEO, Michael Sabia, who has, this energy plan for 2035 and all the things they want to do, saying, we're going to help facilitate relationships, but you got to be true to your word. We're a hurt people. We've been through a lot of trauma. So in terms of getting past those things and building the trust and, coming from that space of wanting to move forward collaboratively, it takes some time to build. But I think they're showing that they're genuine and sincere in their approach. And I think the model, like we said, in the past, it was always what we call IBAs, impact, oh my God, I just had it in my mind. Where it would be a one-time payoff.
Right.
Here we are, we're giving you this for your land, thank you, goodbye, have a nice day. Whereas now it's, okay, we're gonna be a partner, and we're gonna do this for the next 40 years, and we're gonna have equality in the infrastructure, and this could be the return to your community. I mean, right now it's a minimum 10% ownership, but we can buy in up to 49 if we want. So it's up to the community in terms of our risk tolerance. But again, this is a game changer for us. It's something new, it's innovative, and we definitely think it's going to set the stage for relations with First Nations and tribal people into the future, because we also want to be a part of the solution of what's happening with climate change and global warming, and there's different ideas out there.
That gives rise to a question to me. Again, as you can see, from Vermont, and we have, and I have read in Massachusetts and in New York, as the Mayor de Blasio said, great intentions, but there's a lot, I'll say, of people who seek to represent or advocate on your behalf, whether they sort of know you or not. What is your message? I assume there's lots of activists, certainly people who are concerned about yours and your fellow First Nations welfare. What would you say to these groups, how they can effectively replicate or advocate or truly represent to the degree you're comfortable? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it has to come from a genuine space of wanting to build relations with the community, right? So we are literally 10, 12 minutes outside of downtown Montreal. So, our location is key. We're a very progressive community. There's so many of our young people who are going to McGill and Concordia and getting higher levels of education. Our whole town, our community is run by people from our community. And we have everything, all of the infrastructure, our own police, our own fire department. It's like a community, self-sustaining, self-running. It's our own jurisdiction. And in Quebec, it's very challenging because they have their views as a sovereign kind of, wanting to separate even from the country and so forth. Wait a second. You got to come talk to us as, the true and original rights holders and landholders of these lands. So it's all about a shift in the mentality and building, like I said, these relationships, because now we all speak this foreign language. We could all speak to each other and understand each other. And at the end of the day, I think we'll find out we're all coming from the same space. We all bleed the same color blood, and we all kind of want the same things for our future, our families, our children, which is to inherit a clean, safe, healthy home and environment that we were had as well. So I think it's our responsibility.
So genuine concern is fine. I didn't hear any more specific guidance.
Genuine relationships.
Genuine relationships. Let me just tell the audience, Aaron, first. So we have 9 minutes. The microphone is there. If you'd like to ask a question, I'll keep rolling. But please, this is an incredible opportunity to ask a question that you might not get. Look, it's in and you can have a great spotlight on you to do that. Excellent. Well, why don't we go to the question, please? If you would, please just say who you are a little bit in your organization, please.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
for sure.
I have a question for the Grand Chief. My name is Anna Brackenhofer. I work for Power Options. Power Options is a nonprofit based out of Boston, and we have 500 members, other communities and nonprofits across the state. And we work with them on energy-related items to help them decarbonize, and I specifically work on fleet electrification. We're working with a bunch of different organizations and communities in environmental justice communities. And my question is, how do you work on decarbonizing the transportation sector in your community? How are you working to switch your vehicles, especially like police vehicles or fire trucks, to zero-emission vehicles, and how does Hydro-Québec help you achieve that?
So just recently, our whole school bus fleet, which we have about 25 of them, we all went to electric. And that was a initiative by Quebec government to deploy resources into communities to make that kind of transition. In terms of individual persons, automobiles, we haven't really explored like any kind of incentives toward moving toward electric vehicles. There have been businesses in the community who have put in all of the infrastructure for recharging stations and different things like that. In terms of the Hydro-Québec relationship, I mean, we are pretty much at the tip of the iceberg. We were focused solely on getting, this CHPE project moving. We actually just signed the agreement on April 17th, so a lot of the front-end work was happening. But in terms of future opportunities and ways that they could help invest in the community that we can decarbonize, I'm sure will be explored. So we definitely have more to do. And thank you for your question. We will be working on it.
If I may add, again, this is a First Nation community. This is not like a community in the U.S. These are sovereign people. And, when you think about the hundreds of years of colonialism and disinvestment, now all of a sudden they now have a relationship, a contractual relationship. So now revenue are flowing not from an extractive, colonizing way, but now they are partners. And now all of a sudden revenues are coming in. It's going to aid and assist mightily in their energy transition now to cleaner energy and having the resources, right? How are you able to make that transition is through having the monies and the investment to make that happen. And what's very powerful about this relationship for the United States and how it deals with First Nations in the United States and our relationships on this side of the border, but also allies that have been allies of First Nations within Canada, is strengthening their voices at the negotiating table so that they would have the resources. Again, their sovereign wealth is in the natural resources. They're like the Kuwaitis and the Saudis, but instead of dirty fossil fuels, they actually have the natural resources that
Quickly,
can help transport.
I'm sorry, Amber, I just want to rock because we have another question, but let me just let Serge respond. No, go ahead and get in the light. And Serge, quickly, any response? Great question, any response?
Just to add, so the vehicle subsidies come from the government level, they have programs and so on. Hydro-Québec owns what's called the electric circuit électrique in French. And right now we're, I think, above 7,000 charging stations in Quebec, public charging stations in Quebec. So Hydro-Québec is a huge promoter of public charging stations in Quebec at very affordable rates. It's one of our mandates. Many more to come, so very ambitious growth in that sector. And all the communities, including the Mohawk community, have charging stations being installed in partnership. Some of them are entirely paid by Hydro-Québec. Some of the fast chargers are in partnership. So lots of work being done on that side. And for fleet charging, for electric school buses and so on, Hydro-Québec also has a program that they accompany these companies, like school bus businesses and so on, into setting up these fleet chargers, because it's a little more complex in terms of what it needs.
Okay. Next question, please.
My question for Hydro-Québec. I arrived late, and maybe you already explained this, but you work with different places, like in a decentralized way. For Massachusetts, it would be like work with the Charles River, something like that, work with the generating electricity with the river in the side, like that. It would be something that Hydro-Québec could do here.
So we don't produce, generally speaking, the bulk of our production and the energy coming here to the United States, 12% of your power here roughly comes from Quebec hydropower. And it's to the north, to northern areas of Quebec. We're talking about James Bay, about 1,000 miles from north of Montreal. So significantly north, Indigenous land, Cree or Innu, and there's many other communities as well. And that power through transmission is brought all the way here to southern Quebec and to northeastern U.S. So we don't have plans on building or operating infrastructure here in Massachusetts directly, if you want. So,
because transmission always has the problems of fire, and it's very expensive also, all the wiring. So it could be maybe like a cheaper way and a safer way to think about decentralization and have it in place, working with the resource.
I don't want to cut you off, but we're mindful of time. So thank you very much for the question. Please, we have like 2 minutes, so if you can roll, we can go.
Yeah. Thank you. Munir Azam. My name's Munir Azam, Beacon Climate Innovations, and we're based at Greentown Labs and developing tools, in essence, to bring technology, climate technologies into dedicated solutions for communities and municipalities and communities. And I am very impressed with what the panel has just described, and I'd love to hear some thoughts, because this did not happen overnight. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You know, one of the biggest barriers we face and what we're trying to address with the platforms we're developing is the issue of trust. How did, between the organizations we see up there, just a couple of statements about sort of that underlying, how did you develop the trust to get over that?
Trust and respect.
So you have 90 seconds to talk about how you built this relationship. Have at it. Grand Chief.
As I mentioned earlier, it definitely had to start with willing partners to sit down and explore and acknowledge, like I said, the past. But I think it also was about us creating real friendships, getting to know each other on a one-on-one level, because then you really see the sincerity in people and that they mean well. Because we have people come in community all the time. We're looked at as like, oh, well, if I partner with the First Nations, I can do a business and be tax-free. And you can tell right away the grimy people who come into community who are not sincere, and we can sniff them out immediately. And that's why I said I think the shift in this relationship and the approach, based on everything we had been through, was a breath of fresh air. It was something totally different. So.
Wait, sorry, Aaron, let's just make sure that Serge gets a chance here.
I'll be short. Just extremely proud and pleased to count Aaron and Grand Chief as friends. And I think from our standpoint, to your question, the first thing that we did was just sit down and listen to folks, Let's just listen and try and understand their concerns and bring value and bring solutions back to them in a genuine way, not transactional. And that's what we have here. We have, these are my friends, so.
And as an environmental NGO leader, is validating that credibility of those relationships. So we're making sure that they're not greenscaping or green scamming, that this is really a deep, sincere relationship. And then articulating back to our allies in the United States saying, here's what's really happening. Because a lot of folks are concerned about the relationship with the First Nations and that they're not being exploited. And so being that ally and that partner and that bridge builder, we need to really move that needle. And I think we have an opportunity in the Northeast to be seriously, carbon free. And the question is, how do we in the Northeast build those stronger relationships with the Indigenous community, Hydro-Québec, and get more clean energy in the Northeast and decouple ourselves from fossil fuels and fossil fuel pipelines and natural gas.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, we're over time. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers of Climate Tech. This was excellent. Thank you for the honor, Grand Chief Aaron Serge. Thank you very much. If you would please join me in giving them a round of applause.